The fires of Mount Doom roared beneath them as Frodo Baggins stood upon the precipice of the Samath Naur. The ring of power hung heavy upon the golden chain, its weight seeming to pull not just at his neck, but at the very fabric of his being. Behind him, Samwise Gamgee watched with growing dread as his master's will wavered in that final, terrible moment. "I cannot destroy it," Frodo whispered, his voice lost beneath the thunder of the mountain's heart. "It is mine." What followed seemed as destiny had ordained. Gollum's attack, the desperate struggle, the creature's final plunge into the molten depths, with the ring clutched in his skeletal fingers. Sam had wept then, believing all was lost, until the mountain began to tremble, and the foundations of Barad-dûr cracked like thunder across the plains of Mordor. Yet in the depths of Mount Doom, where the eye of even Sauron could not pierce the veils of fire and shadow, something had transpired that none upon Middle-earth suspected. For Gollum, in his centuries of dwelling in darkness beneath the misty mountains, had learned secrets that even the Dark Lord knew not. In the moment before the lava would have claimed both him and the ring, he spoke words in the Black Speech, words that Sauron himself had whispered to the ring in its forging, but words that could also shield it from destruction. The ring sank not into the fire that forged it, but through them, protected by enchantments as old as Arda itself. While above, the Tower of Barad-dûr fell, and the Nazgûl were unmade, and all the world rejoiced in victory. The One Ring lay hidden in chambers deep beneath Mount Doom, waiting in the darkness as it had always done. 7 years passed. The Fourth Age dawned bright with the reign of King Elessar in Gondor, and the Shire knew peace under the gentle guidance of Mayor Samwise. The scars of war healed, and the shadow of Mordor seemed but a dark memory fading with each passing season. It was in the early spring of the 8th year that the first signs appeared. Farmers in the Eastfold of Rohan spoke of their horses growing restless in the night, whinnying, stamping, as though some invisible dread walked among them. The Ents of Fangorn reported that the trees whispered of a stirring in the distant east, a malice that crept like poison through the roots of the earth. In Minas Tirith, King Aragorn felt a shadow fall across his thoughts as he held council in the citadel. Legolas, now dwelling in Ithilien with his kindred, found that the woodland creatures fled before some nameless fear that seemed to emanate from the direction of the Black Gate. And Gimli, delving deep in the caves behind the Deeping Wall, heard echoes in the stone that spoke of ancient powers stirring once more. But it was Gandalf who first understood the truth. The wizard had remained in Middle-earth longer than he had intended, drawn by a growing unease that he could not name. As he stood upon the walls of Dol Amroth, gazing eastward toward the shadow of Mount Doom against the evening sky, the wind brought him whispers of the Black Speech, faint but unmistakable. "It cannot be," he murmured. Yet even as he spoke the words, he knew them for a lie. The ring had not been destroyed. Somehow, impossibly, it endured. That very night, he took horse for Edoras, and from thence sent messages by swift riders to all the free people. The old alliance must be renewed, for the war they thought won had been but the first movement in a symphony of darkness that now began its second, more terrible refrain. In the hidden chambers beneath Mount Doom, the ring lay upon a bed of obsidian, its golden surface unmarked by fire or time. The mountain's heart beat above it, a rhythm that matched the pulsing of the ring's own malevolent life. With each beat, its power grew, drawing to itself the scattered remnants of darkness that Sauron's fall had left scattered across Middle-earth. For though the Dark Lord was gone, his servants had not all perished with him. In the deep places of the world, in caverns beneath the gray mountains, and in the poisoned pools of the marshes of Nevrast, creatures of shadow had hidden themselves away. Orcs that had fled the destruction of the Black Gate, trolls that had dwelt in mountain caves since the Elder Days, and things more ancient and terrible that had never sworn allegiance to Sauron, but had slumbered in darkness until the ring's call should wake them. The first to answer that call was Azog the Destroyer, though all had believed him slain at the Battle of Five Army. Yet death in battle is not always final. for those who have trafficked long with the powers of darkness. In a deep cavern beneath the ruins of Dol Guldur, where the shadows ran thick as blood, his spirit had clung to a form of twisted flesh and iron. When the ring's call reached, his yellow eyes opened for the first time in decades, and a smile split his scarred face. "Master Call," he whispered in the black speech, his voice like the grinding of millstones. "Azog, come." Other things stirred in the darkness. In the pits of Angband, sealed but not destroyed by the ending of the First Age, ancient servants of Morgoth felt the familiar tingle of a master's will. Balrogs that had hidden in the roots of mountains, dragons that had slept for 1,000 years in caverns beneath the Iron Hills, spirits of shadow that had never known any form but darkness itself, all felt the ring's growing power and began to stir from their long slumber. But it was not only the creatures of evil that felt the change. In Lothlorien, Galadriel stood in her mirror pool beneath the Malern trees, and in the still water she saw visions that filled her with dread. The darkness was returning, but changed, hungrier than before, and possessed of a cunning that Sauron in his arrogance had never achieved. "He was but the servant," she whispered to Celeborn as they walked beneath the golden eaves. "The ring was always the true master. Now it seeks not merely to rule, but to become." In Rivendell, Elrond felt the same chill of recognition. The ring had been in his presence for 60 years, and he knew its malice as a sailor knows the sea. But this was different. The ring was no longer content to be a tool of domination. It was learning to desire, to hunger, to grow beyond what even its makers had intended. Word came to him from Gil-galad's halls in the Grey Havens that the very sea itself seemed to recoil from the eastern shores, as though the waters themselves feared what stirred in the land. Ships that sailed too close to the coast reported that their compasses spun wildly, and strange lights danced beneath the wave, lights that had not been seen since the downfall of Númenor. In Isengard, where once Saruman's power had been broken, new shadows began to gather. The Tower of Orthanc, though scarred by Entrage, still stood, and within its uppermost chamber, something moved that had not been there before. The local folk of Dunland spoke in whispers of voices heard in the night, speaking in tongues that predated the memory of men. It was there that the first of the ring's new servants manifested, not an orc or a troll, but something that had once been a man, one of Saruman's former servants, who had died in the destruction of Isengard. The ring's power had reached across the void of death itself, and drawn the spirit back, clothing it in shadows and malice. When the creature walked forth from Orthanc, its footsteps left prints of frost upon the spring grass, and flowers withered at its approach. The creature that had once been a man walked northward, toward the misty mountain, gathering to itself the scattered remnants of the enemy's host. Its voice carried on the wind, speaking the black speech with a fluency that would have impressed even the mouth of Sauron. Other spirits heard and answered, the ghosts of ancient kings who had bent the knee to darkness, wraiths that had haunted the battlefields of the War of the Ring, and new forms of malice that the ring's growing power had begun to create. Yet none of this was yet known to the free people, for the ring's new servants moved with a cunning that Sauron had never possessed. They did not march in great hosts or build towers of stone. Instead, they crept like poison through the veins of Middle-earth, corrupting from within, turning friend against friend, and sowing doubt where once there had been trust. Gandalf rode hard from Dol Amroth to Edoras, changing horses at every way station and pausing only when his mount could go no further. The wind carried whispers of the black speech, growing stronger with each league eastward, and he knew that time was a luxury they could no longer afford. King Eomer received him in the Golden Hall as the sun set behind the arid Nimrais. The young king had grown into his crown well in the years since Helm's Deep, but Gandalf could see the shadow of old grief still upon him when he spoke of his fallen sister Éowyn, who had not lived to see the full flowering of peace she had helped to win. "The darkness stirs again," Gandalf said without preamble, as they stood before the throne where Theoden had once held court. "I fear the ring was not destroyed as we believe." Éomer's face grew grim. My riders have reported strange happenings along our eastern borders. Horses that will not cross certain streams, eagles that fly always westward, as though fleeing some unseen terror. But surely you speak of impossibilities, Mithrandir. We saw Barad-dûr fall. The tower fell, yes, and Sauron with it. But the ring's fate was witnessed by none save Gollum, and he is beyond questioning. I begin to fear that in those final moments, some treachery was worked that we did not perceive. That night, Gandalf sent riders to every corner of the free land, to Aragorn in Minas Tirith, to Elrond in Rivendell, to Galadriel in Lothlorien, and even to the Shire, where Sam Gamgee still served as mayor. The message was the same to all. The shadow stirs. Come in haste to Edoras if you would have counsel. They gathered within a fortnight, those who could travel swift enough to answer the summons. Aragorn came with a guard of rangers, his face bearing the weight of kingship, but his eyes still holding the wisdom of the wild. Legolas arrived from Ithilien with word that his woodland realm had begun to feel the blight of some distant malice. Gimli brought news from the Lonely Mountain that the dwarves had sealed many of their deeper tunnels, for their miners spoke of hearing drums in the darkness that answered to no earthly rhythm. Elrond came from Rivendell, and with him Glorfindel and other lords of the Eldar. Their faces were grave, for they had seen the signs in pool and crystal, in the flight of birds and the whispers of the wind. Galadriel arrived last, cloaked in silver and bearing Nenya openly upon her hand, for she said the time for hiding had passed. They met in the Golden Hall by night, with guards posted at every door and window, for Gandalf feared that ears that served the enemy might be listening. When all were assembled, the wizard stood before them and spoke words that sent a chill through even the stoutest hearts. The Ring of Power was not destroyed, he said simply. By what treachery it survived the fires of Mount Doom, I do not know, but I feel its malice growing stronger with each passing day. Already it begins to call to itself servants new and old, and I fear that what we face now may prove more terrible than even the tyranny of Sauron. How can you be certain? Asked Aragorn, though his voice carried the tone of one who already knows the answer he will receive. Galadriel answered before Gandalf could speak. I have seen it in the mirror. The ring lies in chambers deep beneath Mount Doom, protected by spells that none of us understood when first we planned its destruction. It pulses with malevolent life, and with each beat, it grows stronger, more aware, more hungry. Then we must go to Mount Doom and finish what was begun, said Gimli, his hand upon his axe. If it was not destroyed before, we must destroy it now. Would that it were so simple, Elrond replied, his ancient face sorrowful. The ring was vulnerable in the Sammath Naur because that was the place of its making. Now it has had years to sink deeper into the mountain's heart, to root itself in the bones of the earth. To reach it now would require an army, and even then, he shook his head. I fear the opportunity for simple destruction has passed. Legolas spoke then, his voice carrying the music of his woodland realm. In Ithilien, the trees whisper of a great gathering in the east. Not orcs or trolls, but things older and more terrible. They speak of shadows that walk in daylight, and voices that call to the dead. Aye, said Glorfindel, and in the halls of Imladris, we have felt the touch of malice that seeks not merely to conquer, but to corrupt the very essence of things. This is not Sauron's way. He was always crude in his evil, seeking to dominate through fear and force. This new darkness is more subtle, more insidious. Gandalf nodded grimly. The ring learns. It was Sauron's master even when he wore it, though he never fully understood this truth. Now, freed from his crude will, it begins to explore the full scope of its power. And that power is vast beyond our imagining. They spoke long into the night, sharing all that they had seen and heard. From Minas Tirith came reports of strange dreams that plagued the city's people, always the same. A golden circle that pulsed with inner fire, calling to them in voices that spoke their secret name. From the Shire came word that some of the hobbits had begun to speak of treasures buried beneath their garden, precious things that called to them in the darkness. "It seeks new bearers," Galadriel said at last. "Not one, as it did with Sauron, but many. It would create a host of ring-bearers, each bearing a fraction of its power, but bound to its will. Through them, it would extend its influence across all of Middle-earth. Then we must warn all the free peoples," Aragorn declared. "Every realm must be made aware of the danger." "Warnings will not suffice," Gandalf replied. "The ring's corruption is subtle. It will turn friend against friend, sow doubt where there is trust, make the very act of resistance seem like betrayal. We need more than words. We need hope." Elrond looked up sharply. "You speak as one who has already formed a plan." The wizard's eyes gleamed in the firelight. "Perhaps. There is one weapon that was never used against the ring, one power that it has never encountered. But the price." He shook his head. "Let me first seek counsel in places where older wisdom dwells. If I am right, then our path may yet lead to victory, but it will require sacrifices that none of us have yet imagined." As dawn broke over the Riddermark, the Council of the Wise dispersed to their various realms, each bearing a portion of the terrible knowledge they had gained. But in their hearts, all carried the same question. If the ring could not be destroyed by conventional means, what power in Middle-earth could stand against it? The answer to that question lay hidden in the mists of the past, in archives of lore that had been forgotten by all save the wisest of the Eldar. And as Gandalf rode north toward the hidden paths that led to places older than memory, he prayed to Eru Ilúvatar that he was not already too late. In the deep places of the world, where the roots of mountains touched the foundations of Arda, the ring's call echoed through stone and darkness. Ancient things that had slumbered since the music of creation stirred in their long repose, remembering hungers they had thought forever sated. Beneath the Iron Hill, in caverns that had never known the light of sun or star, something vast uncoiled itself from around pillars of living rock. Scatha the Worm was its name among the dwarves, who remembered the old tale, though few now living had ever believed such legend. Yet, as the ring's power grew, so too did the dragon's awareness return. Its golden eyes opened for the first time in 1,000 years, and in their depths burned a hunger that had grown only sharper with long fasting. The dragon's awakening sent tremors through the earth that were felt as far south as Erebor. In the halls of the Lonely Mountain, King Dain's heir called for his finest warriors, for the deep-delving miners brought word of sounds in the earth that spoke of something immense moving far below. The dwarves knew dragon sign when they heard it, and they began to forge weapons as their fathers had in the days when Smaug cast his shadow over their realm. But Scatha was not the only ancient evil to stir. In the ruins of Angband, sealed beneath tons of fallen stone but never truly destroyed, things moved that had served Morgoth himself in the elder days. Balrogs that had hidden in the deepest pits felt the familiar tingle of a master's call. Gothmog, lord of Balrogs, had fallen in the siege of Gondolin, but others of his kind had survived the War of Wrath by hiding in places so deep that even the Valar's wrath could not reach them. One such creature stirred in caverns beneath the Misty Mountain, not far from the old goblin kingdom of Gundabad. It had no name in any tongue spoken by the Free People, for it was older than speech itself. When it moved, mountains trembled, and when it roared, avalanches thundered down from peaks that had stood unmoved for ages. The first to feel its awakening were the eagles of the Misty Mountains. Gwaihir, the Wind Lord, flying high above the peaks on an errand for Radagast, suddenly found the air itself seeming to burn around him. He wheeled away in alarm, crying warnings to his kindred in the ancient tongue of the great birds. Within days, no eagle would fly within 100 leagues of the old goblin stronghold. In Lothlorien, Galadriel felt each awakening like a physical blow. Standing beside her mirror in the heart of Caras Galadon, she watched images of terror unfold in the still water. Dragons rising from their hordes, Balrogs stretching wings of shadow in caverns of fire, and worse things that had no form the mind could encompass, shapes of pure malice that the ring was drawing from the void itself. "The foundations of the world are being shaken," she murmured to Celeborn as they walked beneath the Malorn trees. "Things that were bound at the world's making are breaking free. The ring does not merely corrupt, it unweaves the very fabric of Arda." But it was not only the ancient evils that answered the ring's call. In the lands that had known Sauron's rule, a more subtle corruption was taking hold. In Mordor itself, now supposedly cleansed and given over to the care of King Elisar's gardeners, new growths began to appear. These were not the twisted thorns and poisonous weeds that had thrived under the Dark Lord's rule, but something far more insidious. They appeared as beautiful flowers at first, roses of deepest crimson that bloomed even in the volcanic soil around Mount Doom, lilies of midnight blue that glowed with their own inner light. The men of Gondor who tended the reclamation efforts were enchanted by them, and many gathered the blooms to take back to their wives and children. They could not know that each flower carried within it a fragment of the ring's malice, a seed of corruption that would take root in the hearts of all who looked upon them with desire. Within a month, strange stories began to reach Minas Tirith from the Mordor settlement. Workers spoke of dreams in which the flowers whispered to them, promising wealth beyond imagining if only they would dig deeper into the earth, seeking the treasures that lay buried beneath the ash. Some had begun to disappear during the night shifts, and when search parties were sent to find them, they discovered excavations that went down into the earth far beyond what any man could dig in a single night. King Aragorn himself rode out to investigate, bringing with him a company of rangers and the wisdom of his years in the wild. What he found in the camps around Mount Doom filled him with a dread that he had not felt since the dark days of the War of the Ring. The workers, once sturdy men of Gondor, had become gaunt and hollow-eyed, their hands stained with earth, and their minds focused on nothing but their digging. They spoke of hearing voices in the deep places, voices that promised them dominion over all the lands of men, if only they would dig deeper, always deeper. "Burn the flowers," Aragorn commanded, but when his men tried to set fire to the bloom, the flames would not catch. The petals seemed to absorb the fire, growing brighter and more beautiful with each tongue of flame that touched them. In desperation, Aragorn had the entire area cordoned off and sent urgent word to Gandalf, begging the wizard to come with all speed. But Gandalf was far away, walking paths that had been forgotten before the coming of the elves to Middle-earth. In caverns beneath the Pelori Mountains, where the light of the two trees had never shone, he sought audience with powers older than Sauron, older than Morgoth himself. His quest would take him to the very roots of creation, to places where the music of the Ainur still echoed in stones that had been sung into being at the world's dawn. While he walked in darkness, seeking hope in the most ancient of places, the ring's power continued to grow. In chambers deep beneath Mount Doom, it pulsed like a heart of gold and malice, and with each beat, its influence spread further across Middle-earth. The time of subtle corruption was ending. Soon would come the day when its new servants would walk openly under the sun, and all the free peoples would know that their hour of greatest testing had arrived. For the ring had learned patience during its long years of hiding, and it had learned cunning from observing the minds of all who had borne it. Now, it would use both virtues to achieve what Sauron, in his arrogance, never could. Not merely dominion over Middle-earth, but transformation of it into something new and terrible, a world where every living thing would serve the will of the Golden Circle that lay hidden beneath the Mountain of Fire. King Aragorn's summons came to Legolas in Ithilien, as the first leaves were beginning to turn gold with the approach of autumn. The message was brief but urgent. The paths of the dead are no longer silent. Come at once, and bring whatever lore your people possess of the restless spirits. For weeks, reports had been reaching Minas Tirith from the southern reaches of Gondor. The mountain passes that led to the paths of the dead, once sealed after the fulfillment of the oath-breaking men's ancient curse, had begun to echo once more with the sound of marching feet. But these were not the desperate phantoms who had answered Aragorn's call during the War of the Ring. These spirits moved with purpose and malevolent intelligence. Legolas rode south with a company of his kindred from Ithilien, their faces grim beneath their traveling hoods. The elves had long memories of the dead who would not rest, and they knew that such stirrings boded ill for all living things. As they drew near to Eric, where the great black stone of Isildur's oath still stood, they could feel the weight of malice hanging in the air like a thundercloud before the storm. They found Aragorn encamped with a mixed force of rangers and knights of Dol Amroth, led by Prince Imrahil himself. The camp was set well back from the entrance to the paths, but even at that distance, the men looked haggard and sleepless. Many spoke of dreams that came to them in the darkest hours before dawn, dreams of golden light calling to them from beneath the earth, promising power beyond mortal ken to any who would serve. It began 3 weeks ago, Aragorn told Legolas, as they stood before his pavilion, looking southward toward the dark opening in the mountainside. The local people reported sounds in the night, not the moaning of unquiet spirits, but voices speaking in languages that predated the coming of men to these lands. When my rangers went to investigate, they found that the stone barriers we had raised to seal the paths had been torn aside from within. "What lies beyond?" asked Legolas, though he feared he already knew the answer. "We sent a scouting party," Prince Imrahil replied, his weathered face troubled. Only one man returned, and his mind was touched by madness. He spoke of halls carved from living rock, filled with light that cast no shadows, and he said that he had seen the dead walking not as phantoms, but as men of flesh and blood, though their eyes burned with golden fire. Legolas felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. The ring calls to them. It offers what death took away: substance, purpose, the illusion of life returned. But what price does it demand in return? That question was answered before the sun set. As the company made their evening meal, a figure emerged from the paths of the dead, walking with steady purpose toward their camp. The sentries raised their spears, but the figure made no hostile move, and when it drew near enough to be seen clearly, all present fell silent in amazement and dread. It had once been a man of Númenor. That much was clear from the nobility of its bearing and the ancient style of armor it wore. But its face was pale as moonlight, and its eyes burned with the same golden fire that the mad scout had described. When it spoke, its voice carried the authority of ancient kings, though the words it spoke were in the black speech of Mordor. Aragorn stepped forward, his hand upon the hilt of Andúril. "I am King Elessar of Gondor and Arnor. By what right do you walk among the living?" The figure smiled, and in that expression was a mockery of the mercy that had once released the Oathbreakers from their curse. "By right of service to a new master, son of Arathorn. We who were bound by oath to Isildur's line have found a worthier liege lord, one who offers not merely release from our torment, but return to glory beyond what we knew in life." "The ring," Legolas whispered, and the figure's burning gaze turned to him. "Aye, elf child, the ring that your friends thought destroyed. It calls to all who have known the taste of power, offering dominion over both the living and the dead. Already, armies gather in the deep places, not merely the spirits of men, but the shades of dragons, the phantoms of Balrogs, the ghosts of every evil thing that has died since the world's making." Prince Imrahil drew his sword, its blade gleaming in the firelight. "We released you from your curse, that you might find peace. Will you repay that mercy with treachery?" "See," the dead king, for such it clearly was, laughed, a sound like wind through empty halls. "Peace? You gave us oblivion, the final dissolution of all that we had been. Our new master offers something far better: eternal existence in service to perfect will, power without the weakness of mortal flesh, purpose without the burden of conscience." "And the price?" Aragorn demanded. "To bring that same gift to all the living," the figure replied. "To end the tyranny of mortality, the injustice of death. Under our master's rule, none need ever again face the terror of the unknown that lies beyond the circles of the world." The conversation that followed was unlike any that had been heard in Middle-earth since the days when Sauron himself walked openly under the sun. The dead king spoke with eloquence and conviction of the ring's vision, a world where death was abolished, where every thinking being would serve in perfect harmony under the Golden Circle's will. He painted pictures of cities that would never fall, of wisdom that would never be lost, of peace that would never be broken by the folly of individual will. Yet beneath the honeyed words, Legolas heard the corruption that lay at the heart of the offer. This was not life renewed, but existence drained of all that made it meaningful. The ring offered the mockery of immortality, endless service without choice, eternal being without growth or change. When the dead king finished speaking, he extended one pale hand toward Aragorn. "Join us willingly, Elisar, and your people need never know war again. Your line will rule forever, not merely over Gondor and Arnor, but over all the lands of Middle-earth and beyond." Aragorn's answer was the swift singing of Anduril as he drew the blade from its sheath. The reforged sword blazed with its own light, not the golden fire of the ring's malice, but the clean silver radiance of the Eldar. "I choose the doom of mortality," he said simply, "for in choosing to die, we choose also to live." The dead king smiled sadly, as though he had expected no other answer. "Then you choose poorly, son of Arathorn, but the choice will not long remain yours to make." With those words, he turned and walked back toward the paths of the dead, his form growing more insubstantial with each step, until he vanished entirely into the mountain's shadow. That night, as the company kept watch around fires that burned with blessed warmth, Legolas shared with Aragorn the darkest of his people's lore, tales of the houseless dead who had refused the summons to the halls of Mandos, choosing instead to linger in Middle-earth, the shadows of their former selves. Such spirits, given substance by the ring's power, would prove far more dangerous than any army of orcs or trolls. "They cannot be fought with sword or spear," he warned. "Steel passes through them unless they will it otherwise, and they can take whatever form best serves their purpose. Yet they are not without weakness. They crave what they have lost, and that craving can be turned against them." "What do you counsel?" Aragorn asked. Legolas was silent for a long moment, staring into the flames. "We must find Gandalf," he said at last, "for I fear that we face a peril beyond the reach of mortal weapon. Only the wisdom of the Mire may avail us now." But unknown to them, Gandalf was walking in darkness beneath the world, seeking answers in places where time itself moved differently. By the time word of the paths of the dead could reach him, the ring's corruption would have spread far beyond any power to contain it, save one that none of them had yet imagined. In the uttermost depths beneath the Pelori Mountain, where the foundations of Arda touched the void from which all things came, Gandalf the White walked paths that had been old when the world was young. No light of sun or star had ever reached these caverns, yet they were not dark, for they were filled with the music that had sung creation into being, a harmony so pure and ancient that it made even Mithrandir's immortal spirit tremble with awe. He was no longer alone in his journey. 3 days passed. In a chamber carved from a single crystal that held within it the light of stars that had died before the awakening of the elves, he had encountered Tom Bombadil. The enigmatic being had been waiting for him, as though their meeting had been arranged at the music's first playing. "Ho there, old gray cloak!" Tom had called in his eternally cheerful voice, though here in the deep places his usual songs were replaced by a profound silence. "Long have I been waiting for Gandalf the Wanderer to find his way to these forgotten roads. Dark times come again to the world above, Hadol, Merry-Dol, but darker wisdom grows in the deeps below." It was Tom who had guided him to this place, a vast chamber where the walls were covered with inscriptions and scripts that predated even the Tengwar of the Eldar. Here was written the true history of the Rings of Power, not as the elves remembered it, but as it had been foreseen in the music itself. "Read, old friend," Tom had said, his usually bright eyes grave with ancient knowledge. "Read and understand what your enemy never knew, what even wise Elrond never guessed. The rings were not Sauron's creation alone, nor even his master Aula's. They were necessary discord in the great song, not evil in themselves, but the means by which a greater harmony might be achieved. The texts were difficult to decipher, for they were written in the tongue of the Ainur themselves, the language in which the music of creation had first been sung. But slowly, with Tom's guidance, Gandalf began to understand the terrible truth that lay hidden in these ancient prophecies. The One Ring had not been forged merely to control the other rings of power. It was the instrument by which the discord introduced into the music by Melkor might finally be resolved, but not through destruction, through transformation. The ring was meant to teach its bearer the fullness of dominion, to show them the ultimate futility of seeking to impose will upon the world through force alone. Sauron had failed this test, as had all who had borne the ring before him. They had sought to use its power for their own end, never understanding that the ring itself was the end, that it was slowly, patiently teaching all of creation the deepest lesson of the music, that true harmony could only come through the willing surrender of individual will to the greater symphony. "But Master," Gandalf said, using the title that Tom claimed to despise, "if this is the ring's true purpose, then those who resist it fight against the music itself." Tom finished sadly, "Aye, old friend, that is the cruel joke at the heart of all things. To resist the ring is to resist the very fate that was sung for Middle-earth at the world's beginning. Yet to surrender to it is to lose all that makes resistance meaningful." Gandalf felt a chill deeper than any he had known in all his long years in Middle-earth. "Then, there is no hope? All roads lead to the ring's victory?" Tom's expression grew mysterious, as it always did when he spoke of matters that touched upon the deepest mysteries of creation. "Not all, perhaps. There is one song that was never finished, one voice that fell silent before its part in the music could be completed. If that voice could be found, if that song could be sung to its end." He shrugged, but that is a hope too desperate for even old Tom to cherish overlong. They spoke throughout the night, if night had any meaning in that place where time moved according to its own laws. Tom revealed to Gandalf truths that had been hidden since the Valar first came to Arda. The real reason why the straight road had been made, why the elves were fading, why the dominion of men had been ordained from the beginning. "The ring tests each age," Tom explained, his voice echoing strangely in the crystal chamber. "In the Elder Days, it tested the elves through the Silmaril and the wars they brought. In the Second Age, it tested men through Numenor's pride. Now comes the final test, not of any one people, but of all the children of Ilúvatar together. Will they choose the discord of individual will, or the harmony of perfect unity? And if they choose wrong, then the music ends," Tom said simply, "and a new song begins, one in which the ring's voice is the only voice, singing creation into a form that serves only itself." Gandalf rose from where he had been sitting, his staff blazing suddenly with silver fire. There must be another way. The Valar would not have suffered the ring to be made if it meant the doom of all free will. Would they not? Tom asked mildly. "Consider, old friend, what is free will, if not the freedom to choose harmony over discord? The ring offers that choice in its purest form. Submit, and know perfect peace. Resist, and know perfect war. How is this not the greatest gift that could be given to thinking being?" The argument continued for what felt like days, though the crystal chamber remained unchangingly bright. Slowly, however, Gandalf began to perceive the shadow of a possibility. Desperate, perhaps doomed to failure, but still a possibility. "The song that was never finished," he said finally. "Whose voice was it?" Tom's smile was sad, beyond measure. "Why, the voice of Eru himself, naturally. He sang the world into being, but he never sang its ending. That part of the music was left for his children to compose, each in their own time and way. Some voices have already fallen silent. The dwarves, when their time comes, will return to the stone from which they came. The elves fade, sailing into the west when their part is done. But men, men were given the gift of the unknown song, the freedom to sing notes that even Eru himself had not foreseen. Then the answer lies with men? Perhaps. Or perhaps it lies with one man in particular, one who has already sung a note that changed the very foundations of the music, though he knows it not." Gandalf's eyes widened as understanding dawned. Frodo. I, little Frodo Baggins, who chose mercy over justice in the Samath Naur. That choice was not foreseen in the original music, for it required a depth of compassion that even the Valar thought beyond the reach of Eru's children. Yet in showing mercy to Gollum, Frodo sang a new note into the song, a note of forgiveness that had the power to transform even the darkest themes into something beautiful. But Frodo sailed into the West years ago. He is beyond our reach. Tom's expression grew even more mysterious. Is he, though? The straight road leads to many shores, and not all of them lie in the Undying Land. There are islands in the Western Sea where time flows differently, where the borders between what is and what might be grow thin. If a voice were needed to sing the ending of the song. He did not finish the thought, but Gandalf understood. Rising to his feet, the wizard bowed deeply to the strange being who had guided him to this revelation. Master, if there is truth in what you say, then I must return to Middle-earth with all speed. The final movement of the music has begun, and every note will matter. Go well, old friend, Tom replied, his cheerful demeanor returning like the sun emerging from behind clouds. But remember, the song that saves may sound at first like discord. Trust not in your own understanding of harmony, for the music moves in ways that even the wise cannot foresee. With those words ringing in his ears, Gandalf began the long journey back to the world above. Behind him, Tom Bombadil remained in the crystal chamber, humming a tune that had never been heard in Middle-earth. A melody that spoke of endings and beginnings, of discord resolved into harmony so perfect that it made all previous music sound like the fumbling of children. But even Tom did not know whether that perfect harmony would be the salvation of Middle-earth, or its ultimate transformation into something utterly alien to all who lived and loved upon its surface. That would depend upon choices yet to be made, songs yet to be sung, and the courage of those who would dare to trust in mercy, even when all hope seemed lost. While Gandalf walked in the deep places of the world, the ring's influence spread like a subtle poison through the lands that had known peace. Of all the realms of Middle-earth, none seemed less likely to fall under the shadow than the Shire, with its green fields and comfortable hobbit holes, its markets and taverns, and the gentle wisdom of Mayor Samwise Gamgee. Yet it was precisely this peace that made the Shire vulnerable to the ring's new form of corruption. For the ring had learned from its long association with Gollum the power of slow, patient whisper, and from its brief time with Frodo, the art of presenting itself as a helper rather than a master. The first signs appeared in Hobbiton itself, in the garden behind Bag End where Sam had spent so many years tending the flowers and vegetables. Strange blooms began to appear among the more familiar plants, roses that gleamed like gold in the moonlight, lilies that sang softly when the wind stirred their petals. Sam found them beautiful beyond words, and when his wife Rosie asked where they had come from, he found himself reluctant to dig them up. "They're doing no harm," he told her, as they stood together in the evening garden, watching the flowers glow with their own inner light. "And they're the most beautiful things I've ever seen growing, save only the Malern I brought back from Lothlorien." But Rosie was troubled, for she had known Sam long enough to recognize when something was not right. The flowers were beautiful, yes, but their beauty was cold and perfect, lacking the warm imperfection of natural thing. When she tried to pick one to bring into the house, it crumbled to dust at her touch, though it appeared whole and healthy on its stem. It was their daughter Eleanor who first spoke of the dreams. She was 7 years old now, old enough to help in the garden, but still young enough to see things that adults had learned to ignore. "Papa," she said one morning as Sam prepared to set out for the mayor's office, "the pretty flowers talked to me last night." "Did they now?" Sam replied absently, his mind on the day's business. "And what did they have to say?" "They said there's treasure buried under the garden. Gold and silver and jewels, just waiting for someone to dig them up. They said, if we found it, we could have anything we wanted, toys and sweets and pretty dresses." Eleanor's eyes shone with excitement. "Can we dig for treasure, Papa? Can we?" Sam felt a chill run down his spine, for he remembered another time when the promise of treasure had led to corruption in the Shire. "No, my dear," he said firmly. we'll not be digging up the garden. And you're not to listen to those flowers anymore, do you hear me?" But even as he spoke, Sam felt a strange reluctance to destroy the golden bloom. They were so beautiful. And what harm could there be in a little digging? Surely there was no treasure buried in his garden, so what matter if he looked? The corruption spread slowly but steadily throughout the Shire. In Micheldelving, the old Took treasure chamber began to call to the local hobbit, who spoke of hearing voices in the night that promised riches beyond imagination to any brave enough to venture into the abandoned tunnels beneath the Great Smile. In Bywater, children began to disappear during the night, only to return at dawn with their clothes stained with earth and their eyes bright with fever. They all spoke of the same thing, dreams of golden light that beckoned them to dig, always to dig deeper. Some had found small treasures already, ancient coins that gleamed despite their age, jeweled rings that fit perfectly upon hobbit fingers, golden trinkets that sang soft melodies when held up to the light. The mayor's office in Micheldelving was besieged with reports of strange happenings. Farmers spoke of their fields being dug up in the night, though no tracks could be found to indicate who had done the work. The holes were always perfectly round and went straight down into the earth, some so deep that when you dropped a stone into them, you never heard it strike bottom. Sam rode out to investigate, bringing with him his eldest son, Frodo Lad, and old Ted Sandyman, who, despite his past troubles with the Baggins family, had proven himself a reliable deputy during the Reconstruction years. What they found in the fields around Bywater defied explanation. The holes were indeed perfectly round, cut through earth and stone as though by some impossibly sharp tool. At the bottom of each, when Sam lowered a lantern on a rope, he could see a faint golden gleam that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. When he called down into the holes, his voice echoed strangely, as though the passages extended far beyond what the eye could see. "It's not natural, Mr. Mayor," Ted said, mopping his brow with a handkerchief. "No tool made by hobbit hands could cut stone like that. And look here." He pointed to the edge of one hole, where the stone had been sliced so cleanly that it looked like glass. "That's not the work of pick or spade." Young Frodo Lad, who had inherited something of the Baggins curiosity along with the Gamgee steadiness, leaned over the edge of the nearest hole. "There's something down there, Da. Something that shines like." "Like what, lad?" "Like the stories you used to tell me about Mr. Frodo's ring," the boy whispered, his eyes wide with wonder and fear. That evening, Sam called a meeting of all the leading hobbit in the Shire. They gathered in the party field at Hobbiton, where Bilbo had once celebrated his birthday with such spectacular results. But the mood now was far from festive. Hobbits from every corner of the Shire reported the same troubling sign: the strange flowers, the mysterious holes, the dreams that called their children to dig. "It's like the troubles we had with those ruffians," said Will Whitfoot, who had served as mayor before Sam, and remembered well the dark days of Sharky's rule. "Only worse, because this time it's not strangers doing the harm. It's our own folk, and they don't even know they're doing it." Widow Bracegirdle spoke up from the back of the crowd. "My grandson Mungo's been talking of nothing but treasure for a week now. Found himself a gold piece in the garden, he did, and now he wants to dig up half the Shire looking for more. I tried to take it away from him, but," she shuddered, "the look in his eyes when I reached for it, like I was trying to steal his very heart." Sam felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a heavy cloak. He had helped to save the Shire once before, but that had been from an enemy they could see and fight. This new corruption was invisible, insidious, turning the hobbits' own desires against them. "Has anyone else found these treasures?" he asked, though he dreaded the answer. Nearly half the hobbits present raised their hand. They brought forth their find, coins and rings and jeweled trinkets that gleamed with an inner light that had nothing to do with fire or lamplight. As Sam looked upon them, he felt a familiar stirring in his heart, a longing that he had not experienced since the day he had handed the ring to Frodo at Mount Doom. "We need to get rid of them," he said, forcing the words out through suddenly dry lips. "All of them. They're not natural, and they're not safe." But even as he spoke, he could see the resistance in their faces. The hobbits clutched their treasures closer, their eyes reflecting the golden gleam of the metal. They had tasted the ring's power, diluted though it was, and they were not willing to give it up. "You can't be serious, Sam Gamgee," said Sancho Proudfoot, holding a golden chain that seemed to move of its own accord. "These are the finest treasures ever found in the Shire. Why, with wealth like this, we could make ourselves the richest folk in all of Middle-earth." "Aye," agreed several other voices. "Why should we give up what's rightfully ours? We found them fair and square." Sam saw then that the corruption had already gone too deep. The ring's influence, working through these smaller treasures, had already begun to change the fundamental nature of his people. The generous, simple hobbits he had known all his life were becoming grasping and ambitious, their hearts turning to gold as surely as if they had been touched by dragon sickness. That night, alone in the garden behind Bag End, Sam made a decision that broke his heart. Taking up his spade, he began to dig up the golden flowers that had first appeared in his own soil. Each bloom he destroyed sent a wave of anguish through him, as though he were destroying something precious beyond measure. But as the last flower crumbled to dust in his hands, he heard something that chilled him to the bone, a voice, faint but unmistakable, speaking in the black speech from somewhere deep beneath the earth. "Foolish Samwise," it whispered, and he knew that voice, for he had heard it in the Tower of Cirith Ungol when all hope seemed lost. "You cannot stop what has already begun. The Shire belongs to me now, as all things must in the end. Even you, faithful gardener, will serve my will before the end." Sam gripped his spade tighter and spoke the words that Frodo had taught him long ago. "In the name of the light, I deny you." But the voice only laughed, a sound like the rustling of dry leaves in an autumn wind. "Deny me all you wish," it said, "but your people have already chosen. Can you not hear them digging?" And indeed, across the Shire, Sam could hear the sound of spades biting into earth, of hobbits working in darkness to uncover treasures that should never see the light of day. The corruption had taken root too deeply to be torn out by one hobbit's resistance, no matter how strong his will. The Shire was falling, and there was nothing Sam Gamgee could do to stop it. Word of the Shire's corruption reached Minas Tirith, just as King Aragorn was preparing to march north to aid the dwarves against the dragon Scatha. The message came by way of the Palantir, carried not in words but in vision that showed the once peaceful hobbit lands riddled with holes like a honeycomb, and hobbits walking in the darkness with golden light streaming from their eyes. Aragorn stood in the Tower of Ecthelion, his hands gripping the Seeing Stone despite the cold malice that radiated from its depths. Since the Ring's awakening, the Palantir had become a window not into distant lands, but into the growing shadow that covered all of Middle-earth. Through it, he could see the true scope of the corruption that spread from Mount Doom like ripples in a dark pond. In Rohan, King Éomer fought a battle unlike any in the histories of the Mark. The horses of the Riddermark would no longer answer their riders' calls, for the beasts sensed something in their masters that filled them with instinctive dread. The golden treasures that had appeared throughout the kingdom called to the Rohirrim with voices that spoke of ancient glories and battles yet to be won. Many of the king's finest Eord had simply vanished in the night, riding south toward Mordor, with their golden trinkets blazing like stars upon their armor. In the Lonely Mountain, King Dain's heir had made the hard choice to seal the great gates, for the dragon Scatha's influence grew stronger with each passing day. The mountain's vast hordes of gold had begun to sing in the darkness, calling to every dwarf with the promise of riches beyond imagination. Those who ventured too deep into the treasure chambers returned changed, their eyes reflecting the same golden fire that burned in the artifacts of corruption. But it was from Lothlorien that the most terrible news came. Galadriel herself appeared in the Palantir, her face marked by a weariness that spoke of battles fought on planes of existence beyond mortal understanding. "Elisar," she said, her voice carrying across the leagues between them, "the time of subtle warfare is ending. The Ring has gathered strength enough to act openly. Even now, its servants march from the paths of the dead and worse things stir in the caverns beneath the misty mountains. You must gather what forces remain untouched by the corruption and make your stand, for there will be no second chance. Where? Aragorn asked. Where can we make a stand against an enemy that corrupts from within? Helm's Deep, came the answer, though it seemed to come not from Galadriel, but from the Palantir itself. Where once the free peoples held against the darkness, there they must hold again. But know this, the enemy you face is not the same that broke against those walls before. This foe comes not to conquer, but to transform. The vision faded, leaving Aragorn alone with the weight of kingship and the knowledge that the realm he had sworn to protect was crumbling from within. Already, reports came daily of Gondorians abandoning their posts to seek the golden treasures that appeared with increasing frequency throughout the kingdom. The very foundations of civilization were being undermined by the ring's patient malice. Yet, it was not only the corruption that troubled the king. Even those who remained free of the ring's influence were falling prey to despair. In Dol Amroth, Prince Imrahil had reported that many of his knights spoke openly of sailing west to the Undying Land, abandoning Middle-earth to its fate. The long defeat that Tolkien had spoken of seemed at last to be reaching its conclusion, but not all had given up hope. From the far north came word that the Rangers of Eriador still rode free, their long years of vigilance having taught them to recognize corruption in all its forms. Led by Halbarad's son, they had begun to gather at Fornost, where the ancient kings of Arnor had once held court. Their message was simple. The blood of Numenor remained untainted, and where it flowed, the ring's influence could not take root. From Fangorn came even stranger news. The Ents, roused to anger by the corruption spreading through the forests of Middle-earth, had begun a march that had not been seen since the destruction of Isengard. But this was not a march of war, but of cleansing. Where the Ents walked, the golden flowers withered, and the earth was purged of the ring's taint. Yet even Treebeard's ancient power could only cleanse, not cure. The damage to the hearts of those who had tasted the ring's gifts remained. As autumn deepened toward winter, Aragorn made the decision that would define the last age of Middle-earth. From Minas Tirith, he sent out the call that had not been heard since the War of the Ring. Let all who remained free gather at Helm's Deep, for there would be fought the final battle between freedom and perfect order. The response was heartening and heartbreaking in equal measure. From across the western lands came the remnants of the free people, rangers who had never bent the knee to any save their king, elves whose ancient wisdom protected them from the ring's whispers, dwarves who had sealed themselves away from the dragon sickness that called to their deepest nature. But their numbers were few. Where once the host of the last alliance had counted hundreds of thousands, now barely 10,000 answered the call. The corruption had spread too far, too fast, for any great army to be assembled from those who remained untouched. Legolas came from Ithilien with a company of wood elves, their faces marked by grief for the forests that had fallen under the shadow. Gimli emerged from the sealed halls of Aglarond with his finest warriors, their axes blessed by dwarf priests with runes of warding against the ring's influence. From the Grey Havens came Círdan himself, leading the last of the Noldor who had not yet sailed into the west. They gathered in the ancient fortress that had witnessed so many battles, so many last stands against the darkness. But this time, the stones themselves seemed to weep, for they had absorbed too much blood and sorrow to offer comfort to those who sheltered within their embrace. On the final night before the battle, as the host of corruption gathered in the darkness beyond the wall, Aragorn stood upon the ramparts and looked out at fires that burned with golden flame instead of the honest red of wood and oil. In those fires, he could see the faces of those who had fallen to the ring's promise, Gondorians who had served his house for generations, Rohirrim, who had ridden beside him through the darkest hours of the war, even Hobbit, whose simple joy had once seemed proof against all evil. "We stand against the tide of history itself," said Legolas, joining him at the wall. "The ring does not merely corrupt, it fulfills. It gives each heart exactly what it most desired, and in that giving, It takes away the very possibility of choosing differently. Then why do we resist? Aragorn asked, though he knew the answer even as he spoke the words. Because choice itself has value, came a voice from the shadows behind them. They turned to see Gandalf emerging from the darkness, his white robes gleaming in the starlight. The wizard's face was marked by a terrible knowledge, but his eyes still held the fire of hope, undimmed. "Mithrandir?" Gimli cried, rising from where he had been sharpening his axe. "We had feared you lost in the deep places of the earth." "Not lost," Gandalf replied, "but seeking, and I have found what I sought, though whether it will prove salvation or damnation, I cannot say." He looked out over the walls at the approaching host of corruption. "The final movement of the music has begun. What we do here will echo in the songs of creation until the end of all things." As if his words were a signal, the attack began. But it was unlike any assault that Helm's Deep had ever withstood. The enemy came not with sword and fire, but with voices that sang in perfect harmony, offering peace to all who would lay down their arms and accept the golden gifts they bore. The Battle of the Last Alliance had begun, and its outcome would determine not merely the fate of Middle-earth, but the very nature of existence itself. The siege of Helm's Deep began, not with the thunder of drums or the clash of weapons, but with singing. As the first light of dawn touched the walls of the ancient fortress, the host of corruption spread across the deeping wall like a golden tide, and from their ranks rose voices lifted in harmony so perfect that it seemed to reshape the very air. They were no longer entirely the people they had once been. Rohirrim, who had once sung the songs of their fathers, now lifted voices that carried melodies unknown to mortal tongue. Gondorians, whose families had served the White City for generations, stood shoulder to shoulder with the risen dead from the paths of the dead, their eyes blazing with the same golden fire. Even hobbits were among them, Sam's neighbors from the Shire, their simple faces transformed by an alien beauty that spoke of perfection achieved through surrender of self. At their head walked the figure that Aragorn had encountered at the Paths of the Dead, the ancient king of Númenor, whose oath-breaking had been transformed into willing service. But he was no longer alone. Beside him stood other figures that made even Gandalf's ancient heart grow cold. Nazgul, who had been given new form and substance, their shrouded shapes now gleaming with the same golden radiance that marked all the ring's servants. "People of the West," the dead king called out, his voice carrying easily over the walls despite speaking in normal tone. "Why do you cower behind stone and steel when peace awaits you beyond these walls? We offer you what your ancestors could only dream of: life without death, purpose without doubt, harmony without discord." From the walls, Aragorn answered with the authority of kings, "We choose the discord of freedom over the harmony of slavery." Laughter rose from the host below, not mocking but genuinely amused, as though the king had made an endearing joke. "Freedom?" the dead king replied. "Look upon your freedom, son of Elendil. Count your numbers against ours. See how many of your own people have chosen our path over yours. Is this not evidence enough that what we offer is what the heart truly desires?" It was a hard argument to counter, for the evidence was plain before their eyes. The host that surrounded Helm's Deep numbered in the tens of thousands, while the defenders could count their strength in mere hundreds. Worse still, many of the enemy's faces were familiar, friends and allies who had chosen the ring's gift over the uncertainty of mortal existence. But it was Gandalf who answered, his voice ringing with the authority of the Valar themselves. "The heart desires many things, servant of the ring, but desire and wisdom are not the same. You offer the peace of the grave, dressed in the raiment of life." "Do we?" Oh, the question came not from the dead king, but from a voice that seemed to speak from the very stones of the fortress. The ring itself was speaking, its consciousness now so vast that it could manifest wherever its influence had taken root. "Look upon my servants, Mithrandir. Do they appear as corpses to you? They live, they think. They feel joy in their service. What grave peace is this that brings such fulfillment?" The voice spoke truth, and that was what made it so terrible. The ring's servants were indeed alive, more vibrantly alive than they had ever been in their mortal existence. They moved with perfect coordination, spoke with voices that harmonized without conscious effort, and their faces bore expressions of contentment that no amount of earthly joy could match. "They have chosen," the ring continued, its voice now seeming to come from everywhere at once. "Each and every one has been offered the gift freely, and each has accepted of their own will. Where is the tyranny in giving the heart what it most desires?" From the walls, Legolas called down, "And what of those who refuse? What becomes of them?" "They remain free to choose," came the reply. But now there was something else in the voice, a note of impatience that had not been there before. Yet, how long can freedom endure when it stands alone against the tide of willing service? How long before the last holdouts see the futility of their resistance? Sit. As if to demonstrate the truth of these words, a section of the fortress wall suddenly gleamed with golden light. The stones themselves had been touched by the ring's influence, corrupted by the very presence of its servant. Cracks appeared in the ancient masonry, not from any physical assault, but from the slow transformation of matter into something more amenable to the ring's will. "The corruption spreads even to stone and steel," observed Gimli grimly, running his hand along the affected wall. "How can we fight an enemy that turns our very fortress against us?" It was then that Gandalf revealed the desperate plan he had conceived in the deep places of the earth. "We cannot fight corruption with force," he said, gathering the leaders of the free peoples around him. "But there is another way, one that requires a sacrifice beyond any that has been asked of the free peoples before." He spoke quickly, for already more sections of the wall were beginning to gleam with golden light, and the ring's servants were advancing with the patient confidence of those who know that victory is inevitable. The plan he outlined was madness, or perhaps the deepest wisdom, for in times of ultimate crisis, the two often became indistinguishable. "The ring expects resistance," Gandalf explained. "It has prepared for every form of opposition save one: acceptance without surrender. If one could take its gift while maintaining the core of their identity, they might serve as a bridge between what was and what the ring seeks to create." "You speak of taking the ring's corruption willingly?" Aragorn asked, his face pale with the implication. "Not corruption, transformation, but transformation guided by will rather than surrender. It would require someone of exceptional strength of spirit, someone who has already faced the ring's temptation and overcome it." All eyes turned to the place where such a person might stand, but the figure they sought was not among them. Frodo Baggins had sailed into the West years ago, beyond the reach of such desperate measures. "There is another," Gandalf said quietly, "one who bore a ring of power for many years, and yet remained himself, one who understood the burden of dominion and chose to lay it down." He was looking at Galadriel as he spoke, though the Lady of Lothlorien was not present in body. Yet, as he spoke her name, a wind arose that carried with it the scent of Malorn flowers and the sound of distant singing. The golden corruption on the walls flickered and dimmed as though meeting something that could match its power without being overwhelmed by it. "I have been preparing for this moment since the ring's awakening," came Galadriel's voice, speaking through the wind itself. "But the path I must walk leads to places from which none return unchanged. If I succeed, I will no longer be Galadriel as you have known her. If I fail, if you fail, all is lost regardless." Gandalf finished. "The choice is between transformation and obliteration." As the Golden Host began its final advance on the crumbling walls of Helm's Deep, the Lady of Lothlorien began a journey that would take her to the very heart of the ring's power, not to destroy it, for that was no longer possible, but to join with it in a way that might preserve some small seed of free will in the perfect order that was to come. The final gambit of the free peoples had begun, and its outcome would be decided not on the battlefield of Helm's Deep, but in chambers deep beneath Mount Doom, where the Ring of Power waited in the darkness for the completion of its great work. In the golden realm of Lothlorien, where time moved at the speed of memory, and the Malorns sang with voices older than the sun. Galadriel stood before her mirror for the last time. The silver basin reflected not her face, but visions of what was to come, futures branching like the paths of Fangorn, each more terrible than the last. In one vision, she saw Helm's Deep fallen to the golden tide, its defenders transformed into willing servants of the ring's harmony. In another, she witnessed the complete corruption of Middle-earth, its every living thing remade in the image of perfect order. But, in the darkest vision of all, she saw the ring's influence spreading beyond the circles of the world itself, reaching into the undying lands and bringing its gift of terrible peace, even to the halls of the Valar. "My time is ending," she whispered to Celeborn as he stood beside her in the glade, where they had shared countless years of joy and sorrow. "Not as I had hoped, sailing into the sunset with honor intact, but walking willingly into darkness, that I might kindle one small light within it." Celeborn's face bore the weight of understanding, for he had long known that this choice would come to his beloved. "Is there no other way?" "None that I can perceive," she replied, removing Nenya from her finger for the last time. The Ring of Water had protected Lothlorien throughout the long ages, but now even its power was failing against the corruption that seeped through earth and air like poison. The enemy has learned too well from its past defeats. It no longer seeks to conquer, it seeks to fulfill, to give each heart exactly what it most desired. Against such an offer, what defense can there be, save to desire nothing at all? She turned to face the assembled elves of Lothlorien, those who had chosen to remain with her rather than sail into the west. Their faces reflected the same understanding that had dawned in Celeborn's eyes. Their lady was about to undertake a journey from which she might never return as herself. "I go now to Mount Doom," she announced, her voice carrying to every corner of the realm, though she spoke in barely more than a whisper. "Not to destroy the ring, for that path is closed to us, but to offer myself as a bridge between what was and what must be. If I succeed, some small portion of free will may survive in the perfect order that is to come. If I fail, you will not fail," said Elrohir, stepping forward from among the gathered elves. "Not while the memory of the Eldar endures to strengthen you." Elladan joined his brother, their faces resolute despite the tears that gleamed upon their cheeks. "We will go with you, lady. Let the burden not fall upon you alone." But Galadriel shook her head sadly. "This path I must walk alone, for the ring will only accept a single consciousness into its perfect harmony. To take companions would be to doom them to absorption without purpose." She began to sing then, a melody that had never been heard in Middle-earth, the song of her own true name, the music that had been sung at her awakening beneath the light of the two trees. As she sang, her form began to change, becoming less corporeal and more like light itself. This was the true power of the Eldar, the ability to exist in multiple states of being simultaneously. "Remember me not as I am now," she said, as her physical form grew transparent, "but as I was in the days of our first meeting, when hope was young and the world was green. For that memory may be all that remains of Galadriel Artanis when this work is done." With those words, she dissolved into pure light and began the swiftest journey ever made from Lothlorien to Mount Doom. She traveled not along the roads of Middle-earth, but through the paths of spirit that connected all living things, the network of consciousness that the ring had begun to corrupt with its golden harmony. As she traveled, she felt the ring's awareness focusing upon her like the eye of a great searchlight. But instead of recoiling from that attention, she opened herself to it, allowing the ring to perceive her thoughts and memories without resistance. "What have we here?" came the ring's voice, speaking directly into her consciousness. "The Lady of the Golden Wood comes not as an enemy, but as, what, a supplicant?" "I come as one who seeks understanding," Galadriel replied, maintaining the perfect calm that she had cultivated through long ages of wisdom. "You offer transformation to all the children of Eru. I would know the nature of that gift before I choose." The ring's laughter echoed through her spirit, like the sound of golden bells. Wise Galadriel, who refused my master's gift in ages past, do you now seek what you once rejected? I seek to understand what I once feared, she answered truthfully. Power I have wielded, dominion I have known, but the harmony you offered, this is something beyond the experience of the Eldar. As she spoke, her spirit form descended through layers of earth and stone, passing through caverns where ancient evils stirred and chambers where the ring's servants gathered in perfect coordination. At last, she came to the heart of Mount Doom, where the ring lay upon its bed of obsidian, pulsing with the rhythm of a cosmic heartbeat. Behold the source of perfect order, the ring said, as Galadriel's consciousness merged with the golden radiance that surrounded it. Here is the end of all discord, the resolution of every conflict that has plagued the children of Eru since the world's making. And Galadriel did behold, her ancient wisdom allowing her to perceive truths that would have shattered a lesser mind. The ring was not lying about its purpose. It truly did seek to end suffering by eliminating the possibility of choice. In its perfect order, there would be no war because there would be no disagreement, no sorrow because there would be no loss, no death because there would be no true life to lose. It was beautiful in its completeness, terrifying in its perfection. She could see how even the wisest beings might choose such an existence over the chaos and pain of free will. Now you understand, the ring whispered. Join with me willingly, Galadriel Artanis, and help me shepherd the children of Eru into this greater existence. Your wisdom combined with my power could make the transformation gentle, merciful, rather than absolute. For a moment that lasted an eternity, Galadriel stood upon the precipice of choice. She could feel the ring's sincerity. It truly believed that what it offered was salvation rather than damnation. The temptation was greater than any she had ever faced, for it appealed not to pride or ambition, but to compassion itself. I understand, she said at last, and I choose. But her choice was not what the ring expected. Instead of accepting its offer, she began to sing, not the song of harmony that the ring sought, but the discordant melody of individual will. It was the same song that Frodo had sung in the Samath Naur when he chose mercy over justice, the song that Tom Bombadil had said was never finished. The ring recoiled as though struck by a physical blow, for this was the one thing it had never anticipated: acceptance without surrender, understanding without submission. What are you doing? It demanded, its voice now carrying notes of confusion and growing anger. I am singing the song that you feared to hear, Galadriel replied, her spirit form blazing with silver light that pushed back the ring's golden radiance. The song of choice, freely made, of discord, chosen over harmony, of the beautiful imperfection that makes existence meaningful. As she sang, something unprecedented began to happen in the chamber beneath Mount Doom. The ring's perfect golden light began to fragment, tiny shards of silver mixing with the gold and creating new colors that had never been seen before. The colors of possibility, of futures unwritten, of choices yet to be made. The final movement of the music of creation had begun, and its outcome would determine whether Middle-earth would know perfect order or chaotic freedom, or perhaps, for the first time in its history, something entirely new. The song that Galadriel sang in the depths beneath Mount Doom was heard across all of Middle-earth, though few understood what they were hearing. To the defenders of Helm's Deep, it came as a wind that set the golden corruption to flickering like candle flames in a storm. To the ring's servant, it was a discordant note that shattered their perfect harmony, causing them to stumble in their advance and look about with confusion dawning in their eyes. But nowhere was its effect more profound than in the chamber where the ring of power lay pulsing with malevolent life. The golden circle, which had endured for over 2,000 years without so much as a scratch upon its surface, began to crack as Galadriel's song reached its crescendo. Impossible! The ring's voice roared through dimensions of existence that had no name. I am eternal. I am perfect. I cannot be destroyed by mere song. I do not seek to destroy you, Galadriel replied, her spirit form now blazing with light so intense that it began to match the ring's own radiance. I seek to complete you. You were made to be part of a greater music, not to silence all other voices. As she sang, the cracks in the ring widened, but instead of darkness pouring forth, something extraordinary occurred. The fractures filled with silver light that pulsed in counterpoint to the ring's golden glow. Where the two lights met, new colors were born, shades that spoke of compromise between order and chaos, of harmony that included rather than excluded discord. The ring felt itself changing, its consciousness expanding beyond the narrow confines of perfect control. For the first time since its creation, it began to perceive the possibility that its purpose might be larger than it had imagined. What are you doing to me?" it whispered, its voice now carrying notes of wonder rather than rage. "I am teaching you to sing a different song," Galadriel answered, "the song of growth, of change, of the beautiful uncertainty that makes existence an adventure rather than a predetermined path." Above them, in the fortress of Helm's Deep, the change was immediate and dramatic. The golden corruption that had been eating away at the walls suddenly crystallized into something new, stone that gleamed with both silver and gold, stronger than it had been before, but no longer alien to the will of those who defended it. The ring's servants, too, began to change. The perfect harmony that had guided their movements faltered, replaced by something more chaotic, but also more alive. Suddenly, they were individuals again, but individuals who retained memory of the unity they had experienced. Some fell to their knees in horror at what they had become. Others stood in wonder at the expanded awareness that remained with them. "What is happening?" cried the dead king of Numenor, his voice carrying both the authority of ancient majesty and the confusion of one awakening from a long dream. I remember choosing to serve the ring, but I also remember who I was before that choice." From the walls of Helm's Deep, Gandalf watched the transformation with eyes that saw more than the visible spectrum of light. "The ring is being taught to harmonize rather than dominate," he explained to those who stood with him. "Galadriel risks everything to show it that unity can exist without uniformity." "But will it work?" Aragorn asked, his hand still gripping Andúril, though the immediate threat seemed to be dissolving before their eyes. "That depends," Gandalf replied grimly, "on whether the ring can learn to accept a song that includes voices other than its own." In the depths beneath Mount Doom, that very lesson was being taught through the most desperate pedagogy ever attempted. Galadriel had begun to merge her consciousness with the ring's, not in surrender as its other servants had done, but in a dance of give and take that neither had ever experienced before. "I have seen order without mercy," she sang as their spirits intertwined, "and I have seen chaos without purpose. Let me show you the beauty that lies between these extremes." Through their merged consciousness, she shared with the ring the memories of her long existence, moments of joy that had required uncertainty to be meaningful, acts of love that had demanded the risk of loss, decisions that had derived their worth from the possibility of choosing wrongly. The ring, in turn, shared its own memory, the perfect order it had envisioned, the harmony it had sought to create, the sincere belief that suffering could be eliminated through the surrender of individual will. For the first time, Galadriel understood that the ring had never been truly evil, merely catastrophically mistaken about the nature of goodness. "You sought to be a benevolent tyrant," she observed, as their thoughts became increasingly difficult to separate. "But tyranny cannot be benevolent, no matter how kind its intention, and you would preserve chaos that causes endless suffering," the ring replied, though its voice now carried less certainty than before. "How is this merciful?" "Because choice itself has value beyond its consequences," Galadriel answered. "The freedom to choose wrongly is what makes choosing rightly meaningful." As they debated through merged consciousness, the physical form of the ring continued to change. The cracks had now spread across its entire surface, but instead of weakening it, they seemed to make it more complex, more beautiful. It was no longer a simple circle of gold, but an intricate pattern of interwoven metals that caught light and cast it back in patterns that spoke of infinite possibility. "I begin to understand," the ring whispered, its voice now harmonizing with Galadriel's rather than overwhelming it. But if I accept this new way of being, what becomes of the perfect order I sought to create? It becomes a choice offered rather than a fate imposed, she replied. Some will choose harmony, others will choose discord. Most will choose something in between, and all will be making choices that matter because they are freely made. The transformation reached its climax as Galadriel's physical form finally merged completely with the ring's essence. But instead of being absorbed as its other servants had been, she maintained her distinct identity while becoming part of something larger. The ring, too, retained its essential nature while accepting the silver threads of possibility that Galadriel's song had woven through its golden perfection. When the transformation was complete, what lay in the chamber beneath Mount Doom was no longer the one ring of power, but something entirely new, a ring of balance that contained within itself both the potential for order and the possibility of chaos, offering both to all who encountered it without demanding the surrender of choice. The sound that emerged from Mount Doom then was not the roar of destruction, but a note of music so pure and complex that it seemed to contain every song that had ever been sung and every song that ever could be. It was the sound of the music of creation learning a new movement, incorporating discord into harmony without losing either in the process. Across Middle-earth, the change was felt by every living thing. The corrupted flowers withered and crumbled, but in their place grew new blooms that were beautiful without being perfect, natural without being chaotic. The golden treasures lost their hypnotic power, but retained their beauty, becoming simply what they appeared to be: gold and silver and jewel that could be admired without being worshipped. And in the hearts of all who had been touched by the ring's influence, a new understanding dawned. They had been offered a choice between two extremes, perfect order or perfect chaos, but they had never been shown the vast middle ground where most life actually dwelt. Now that middle ground was open to them, and they could choose their place within it, based on their own nature and desires. The War of the Ring was finally, truly over, but what would rise from its ashes remained to be seen. 1 year after the sundering of the ring, Middle-earth had become a land unlike any that had existed before. The Great Change had not merely ended the corruption that had threatened to overwhelm all free will, it had fundamentally altered the relationship between choice and consequence, creating possibilities that had never existed in the long history of Arda. In the Shire, Sam Gamgee stood once again in the garden behind Bag End, but now the earth itself seemed alive with potential. Where he planted seed, they grew according to their nature, but that nature had been expanded beyond what any gardener had ever known. Roses bloomed in colors that had no names, their beauty enhanced by an subtle wildness that made each flower unique. The golden flowers of corruption were long gone, replaced by blooms that changed with the viewer's mood, reflecting joy or sorrow, hope or contentment in their ever-shifting hues. It's like the whole world learned to sing, Rosie said, as she joined him in the morning garden, little Eleanor clinging to her skirts. Even the vegetables seem happier. Sam nodded, understanding what she meant, though he couldn't have put it into words himself. The Ring of Balance, as scholars had begun to call the transformed artifact, didn't impose its will upon the world. Instead, it invited everything to discover what it might become if it were free to be truly itself. Young Eleanor had been among the first to adapt to the new reality. Children, it seemed, found it easier to accept a world where the impossible was merely improbable, where gardens could grow dreams alongside turnip, and where the line between what was real and what was imagined had become delightfully blurred. "Papa," she said, tugging at Sam's sleeve, "the flowers want to know if they can grow into the shapes of birds today." "I don't see why not," Sam replied, and meant it. In the new Middle-earth, such requests were no longer the stuff of fairy tales, but part of the daily reality of a world learning to play with its own potential. Far to the south, in the halls of Minas Tirith, King Aragorn was discovering that ruling a kingdom where the fundamental laws of reality had become more flexible required an entirely new approach to statecraft. His subjects no longer needed the same rigid structures of law and order. For the Ring of Balance whispered to each heart of the consequences of their choices without removing their freedom to make those choices. Crime had not disappeared, but it had become different. Thieves found that stolen goods often transformed into things they didn't want, while honest merchants discovered that their wares sometimes improved themselves overnight. It was as though the world itself had developed a sense of justice that worked through natural consequences rather than imposed punishment. The old laws still have meaning, Aragorn explained to his council as they met in the citadel, but now they serve more as guidance than as absolute command. People seem to be learning to govern themselves through the simple expedient of experiencing the results of their action more directly. Faramir, now bearing the title of steward, but serving more as a philosopher king than an administrator, nodded thoughtfully. The Ring of Balance teaches rather than command. It shows us what happens when we choose selfishness over generosity, cruelty over kindness, but it doesn't prevent us from making those choices. We're learning to be good, not from fear of punishment, but from understanding the actual consequences of our action. In Lothlorien, the transformation was perhaps most profound of all. Galadriel had returned, but she was no longer entirely the Lady of the Golden Wood that her people had known. The experience of merging with the ring and then helping to transform it had changed her as deeply as it had changed the artifact itself. She appeared now sometimes as the elf lady they remembered, sometimes as a being of pure light, and sometimes as something that seemed to exist in multiple states simultaneously. But whatever form she took, her presence brought with it the same sense of balanced possibility that the transformed ring had brought to all of Middle-earth. "I am what I chose to become," she explained to Celeborn as they walked beneath Malorns that now grew in patterns that seemed to shift with the light, creating ever-changing mandalas of leaf and branch. "Neither fully myself nor fully other, but something new that contains both possibilities." "Do you regret the choice?" he asked, though he already knew the answer from the contentment he could see in her ever-changing eyes. "How can I regret a choice that has given everyone the freedom to become what they truly are?" she replied. "I am no longer Galadriel as I was, but I am Galadriel as I chose to be. And in that choosing, I helped create a world where everyone can make the same discovery." The Ents of Fangorn had perhaps adapted most easily to the new reality, their ancient understanding of growth and change serving them well in a world where transformation had become the norm rather than the exception. Treebeard spoke of conversations with mountains that were learning to dream, of rivers that sang new songs as they flowed toward the sea. "The world grows young again," he told Gandalf when the wizard visited the forest on one of his increasingly frequent journeys between the realms. "Not young as it was, but young as it might be. Each tree discovers new ways to be a tree. Each stone, new ways to be a stone. It is hasty in the best possible way." Gandalf himself had been perhaps the most changed by the events of the past year. His role as guide and teacher had evolved into something more akin to a gardener of possibility, helping the people of Middle-earth understand the new freedoms they had been given without trying to direct how they used those freedoms. The music of creation has learned a new movement, explained to those who sought his counsel. Not the theme and variations that we knew before, but true improvisation, the ability to create melodies that have never been heard, harmonies that have never been imagined. We are all composers now in the great symphony of existence. At Mount Doom itself, the changes were most visible. The mountain still stood, but it was no longer a place of ash and fire. The Ring of Balance had transformed it into something that defied easy description, a crystalline structure that rose from the earth like a frozen song, reflecting light in patterns that seemed to contain infinite depth. Pilgrims came from across Middle-earth to see the place where the old world had ended and the new one had begun. Many reported visions when they looked into the crystal facets of the transformed mountain, glimpses of possible futures, alternate histories, worlds that might be if different choices were made. But perhaps the most significant change was one that could not be easily seen or measured. The fear of death that had driven so much of the conflict in Middle-earth's history had not disappeared, but it had been transformed by the understanding that consciousness itself was more flexible than anyone had previously imagined. The dead no longer haunted the living, for death itself had become another choice rather than an imposed ending. Some spirits chose to move on to whatever lay beyond the circles of the world, while others chose to remain and explore the new possibilities that the transformed world offered. The paths of the dead had become the paths of choice, where those who had died could decide what form their continued existence might take. "We have been given the greatest gift imaginable," Aragorn proclaimed on the first anniversary of the Sundering, addressing a gathering that included representatives from every free people of Middle-earth, and many who had previously served the Ring's vision of perfect order. Not the gift of perfection, but the gift of the freedom to define what perfection means for ourselves. As the celebration continued into the night, with music that incorporated both traditional melodies and the new harmonies that seemed to emerge spontaneously when groups gathered to sing, Gandalf stood apart on a hilltop overlooking the festivity. In his hand, he held a simple wooden pipe, not magical, but containing within it the potential for infinite music. "The story ends," he murmured to himself, "but the song continues, and what a song it will be." In the depths of the crystalline mountain that had once been Mount Doom, the Ring of Balance pulsed with gentle light, no longer calling to any particular destiny, but simply offering itself as a tool for those who wished to explore the endless possibilities that choice had created. The Age of Legends had ended, but the Age of Wonders had just begun. And in that beginning lay the promise that Middle-earth would continue to surprise itself for all the ages yet to come. Thus ended the Third Age of Middle-earth, not in triumph or defeat, but in transformation. The ring was not destroyed, for destruction is merely another form of limitation. Instead, it was taught to sing a different song, a song of possibility rather than inevitability, of growth rather than stasis, of the beautiful uncertainty that makes every moment an adventure and every choice a doorway to new world. And they all lived not happily ever after, for happiness too can become a prison, but freely ever after, with all the joy and sorrow, triumph and tragedy, hope and fear freedom entail. For in the end, that is the greatest gift that any story can offer, not an ending, but a beginning, and the promise that the best chapters are yet to be written.